Just give it a second. Okay. Vasili, welcome to the Tech 45 podcast. I'm so happy that you're able to join me this afternoon, man. How you doing?
Doing well, Jack. Thank you very much for having me.
Nice. If you don't mind, could you introduce yourself to my 15 subscribers?
To all 15, huh? I like that. I'm Vasili Kapogianis, President and CEO of VK Integrated Systems. I'm a nerd. I love guns. I love cars. I love a bunch of the stuff that nerds should love. Uh, I started VK Integrated Systems in 2014, and we're about to have our 10-year birthday coming around the corner this summer, actually.
It's amazing. Yeah, that is one thing I love about you is that you have this interesting mix of nerd technology interests, which I think anyone that knows you would know that right off the bat. But then you also like are into tactical defense technologies, communication systems, weapons. So it's a cool mix. Honestly, I like what you guys do. You guys do a kind of a variety of really cool development work, mostly for the DoD, but for law enforcement as well. Correct?
Yep, we are expanding that for not just law enforcement, but first responders as well. It's really a lot of quality of life updates for ATAK and TAC servers, managing the said TAC servers, all that stuff. And we can get into the nitty gritty when you're ready, but you know.
Yeah, maybe a good place to start is to tell the audience a little bit about your background. Kind of how did you get to the point where you wanted to start your own company? What led up to that? How did you narrow down what interests you wanted to focus on with VK Integrated Systems? And for those that don't know, Vasili is the president of VK Integrated Systems. It's a small, I would classify you guys as a defense technology company.
Yeah,
And you guys are headquartered in Clarksville, Tennessee, correct?
that's it.
Cool. Yeah. Why don't you tell the audience, what sparked your interest in kind of getting to where you are today?
So, growing up, my dad was a radar systems engineer. So I'd always be around, him, and he's always on a conference call talking about receiver exciters and performance on a radar system, and that stuff just started through osmosis, just getting me interested in it. And I mean, you couple that with Hughes Aircraft bring your kid to work day, like, hey, you got a cellophane section, bubble wrap, three toothpicks, some masking tape, and an egg, and you got to drop it off the top of the parking structure. See
I
who
love that
survives,
stuff.
Yeah, and it's fun, right?
It
So
is.
it started going from that to let's take apart dad's old computer, and he's kind of pissed off, and then start working on cars. And when it came time to study and to do some stuff, I was like, man, I don't want to be like my dad. Guy sits in the office all day. Look what I do now, right? Guy sits in the office all day, and I want to do something on my own. I don't want to work for the man. So I was like, hey, I'm thinking of studying business. And he's like, son, that's cool. You want to be an entrepreneur and start business. I will give you one piece of advice, or I guess it wasn't advice. It was more like the mind judo via Socratic method. He's like, you can start your business, start building it. You can hire people who you don't understand what they do 100%, or you can study engineering, and then you can start your own business and understand what the engineers do. I'm
Yeah,
like,
that's
all
great
right,
advice. That's
yeah,
that's phenomenal advice. I was fortunate early in my career that I got to work with a lot of talented engineers, so I was exposed to a very mature product development process and a bunch of different engineering disciplines too. Working in the aviation industry, and yeah, I think that's really good advice. That's probably the same advice I would give my son if he was interested in starting some sort of business. I think the technology and the engineering behind the products or services is way more important. I was a business major, and I can attest that you could probably learn the business side a lot easier than you could the engineering side of the house. So that's my take on it.
yeah,
No offense to fellow business majors like me, but I think if you are pursuing a 4-year degree or further, you should take a second look at one of those engineering or physics degrees as well. So I don't know. That's my 2 cents, but yeah, good advice from your dad. Your dad's awesome, by the way. I really enjoyed meeting him in Nevada this year. So
yeah. Thanks. He's an interesting character. I'll
yeah,
say that. I owe a lot. I mean, I wouldn't be where I am without his support.
that's awesome.
He's
I that's awesome. Yeah, I love hearing about father-son stories in general. I have two sons, and it's a really special connection. And maybe if you could expand upon, what was the most impactful when your dad was, by osmosis, or maybe even bringing you into work or exposing you to some of the programs he was working on. Is there any memory in particular when you were a child that really sparked your interest in what he was doing, or maybe a related field?
I mean, the him bringing me to work and to like a rollout. He did a rollout for, I think it was the HISAR radar system. It was on a King Air 200 platform, and Air Force did a big old rollout East Coast. Went to Virginia, and it was just seeing all these dudes in Air Force uniforms. Everyone, it was a black tie event, so it's a big deal, and it was really interesting. I was like, what is all this stuff? Like, I didn't understand the significance of that type of radar, because I was younger. But and then seeing his name in the paper for the Global Hawk,
Oh, it's so
he
cool,
did
man.
a radar system for that at Raytheon. So they did a
Oh,
little snippet. I guess some reporter went to El Segundo and did an interview and then put his name in the paper. He was proud of that.
that's so cool. And that radar system you mentioned that was integrated in the King Air, the King Air 200. I wanted to show the audience. So I'm kind of an aviation geek. If you couldn't
Yeah.
tell,
Right.
so that right there is a Cessna Caravan,
Hmm.
and it's got a PT6 engine on the front of it. The King Air has two Pratt and Whitney PT6 engines. So I'm going to pull up a picture of a King Air. I'll show you a military one at first. For those that aren't familiar with, I know you are familiar with the airframe. It's one of my favorite airframes in the world, and I have had the great fortune in riding in a bunch of different King Air configurations, and it's an airframe that's proven. It's been around for a really long time. They've produced thousands of them, both for the civilian market, for the DoD, for law enforcement, and then for a lot of the federal agencies. Like I think they use them to like identify forest fires. They obviously use them for a variety of radar systems, ISR systems. But anyway, let me pull up a picture of
Yeah.
it. So for those that have never seen a King Air, it's one of my favorite airplanes in the world. Um, and because it's so versatile, that's why the military loves it too. Every branch of the military um, has got some version of the King Air. So you can see just a variety of different ones here. You've got one, it looks like it's a Royal Air Force. I don't know if that's Britain or Australia, but then some of the ones you'll see in the DoD are more
Oh yeah.
like this drab paint. And there's a bunch of different facilities. I don't want to name any names, but there's a bunch of different companies here in Virginia actually that do really cool modifications to the King Air because there's really three things that are amazing about the King Air. It's the reliability and durability of the platform. That's why the DoD loves it. It's got pretty good long endurance. So if you throttle the props down, you throttle the engines down, it pretty much sips fuel at altitude. And then it's got a pretty good payload for how big it is. So the gross weight and the gross payload for this airframe is actually pretty impressive. But yeah, so that's one of my favorite airplanes here. I think the Army calls them what, the C-12s? Is that the military nomenclature for them?
Don't know. I wish I had that off the top of my head.
Yeah, I don't know. I could Google it, but I'm pretty sure it's a C-12. But yeah, this is the King Air 200 that Vasili was talking about. I just love this airplane. They're so incredible. So anyway, I went on a tangent there, but
Well, no
so
worries.
that was obviously an impactful moment for you, and just kind of being around your father, working on some really important strategic DoD initiatives. What else, as a child, maybe not even related to your relationship with your father, but what else sparked your interest with technology? Because you seem to have a really, really an affinity for emerging tech. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, I like to give Legos a little bit of credit, I guess.
Okay. So
Uh,
okay, yeah, yeah.
and the thing that I loved about the Legos, like I love about engineering, is you've always got your blank slate. No matter what happens, you've messed up. Is just tear it down, start new, and you get through a methodical process of, well, I need this many bricks, this many types of bricks, this many colored bricks, and then, well, if I want to make a spaceship that is actually a pirate ship that should land on a moon base, I need to have these things to get my space armada over there, so to speak. So that was it made life a little bit easier as far as relating. How am I going to get, you know, a butt stock with integrated electronics to do some things? Well, you just do your building blocks sort of like Legos. That's obviously
Yeah.
bringing it way down. And if my team were here, I'm sure they'd laugh at me.
No, I like that analogy. And I've heard that analogy before that, people that are building technology products like you are and you and your team are, they view it the same way. They view it as like, okay, I need to get the right Lego pieces. I've even heard that same analogy. Like you get the right building blocks and you know, the right PCBA boards for this application in the right enclosure. If you break those complex problems down into smaller subsets, I think that's a good way to approach development in general. Um, so what else? What early on in your career before you started VK Integrated Systems, can you talk about what sort of programs you were working on? I mean, you don't have to go into detail, but what sort of direction were you headed if you had not started your own company?
Oh man. Okay, so out of high school, I wanted to because I had a Mazda RX-7, and it was I modded it way too much for living in California, so I couldn't even drive it on street anymore.
Legally, right?
Yeah, legally. That was sort of a problem. Couldn't pass emissions. It was too loud. Every
Sure.
Honda Civic wanted to race me, and I had it running off of. It was tuned for 110, and then we tuned it for 85, and then it was doing. Oh yeah, so that made life a little bit easier because we put on we put a monster port on there. We put 1500 cc secondary injectors, 750 cc primary injectors, and I mean this thing just gulped fuel. But I mean it made I think it was 370 ish torque and 350 horsepower with new twin turbos from Japan on that little Japanese rice rocket. I mean, it was sweet. I love that car. It's still in my parents' garage. I need to get it out to here to Tennessee.
That's
But
awesome.
yeah, it was like, man, why don't we have a better $30,000 sports car? We only have the Mustang, and that's kind of it. Well, let's go rebuild Detroit. So one of my friends from high school and I is like, oh yeah, I love electronics, and I'm like, yeah, I want like a V10. I want to do some really cool, like just raw horsepower stuff. Let's bring back American muscle. And we started taking automotive classes at the community college. Started taking some math classes. So essentially, we were going to go out of that community college and into our universities, respectively, uh, being sort of well-rounded as far as hands-on applications are concerned, engineers or engineering students, and that sort of turned into a well, Detroit's already gone. It's a lost cause. Plus the
Yeah,
oh,
unfortunately,
yeah.
yeah, unfortunately, you're right. So, were you doing a lot of the engine work yourself? Like, were you turning wrenches?
I mean, I did engine building course. Did I like turning some wrenches? I did. Was I good at it? No, I was probably shitty in automotive tech if I was going to keep going that route.
Same.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, can I still do a few things? Yeah, I can still work my way around, but certainly easier to have someone who does it day in and day out do a little more efficiently.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, that sort of specialization. When I talk to my friends that are like really good with engines, like they can rebuild, diesel motors and stuff. I was like, that's.
That's
I mean, I could watch a lot of YouTube videos, but that's still way past my
yeah,
competency for that. So it's like I don't know. But I respect the heck out of people. A lot of the aircraft mechanics I worked with in the aviation industry just had a knack for solving really complex problems. Whether it be, why is this engine not, running balanced? Why is there oil on the cowling of the engine? And they would just see that they could tell by the oil pattern,
hmm
oh, that engine needs a new starter generator. They could just tell. They say they know that this oil pattern spewing on the cowling in flight, this is why the aircraft was flying. And they would look at it on the ground. They'd be like, oh, yeah, that's what it was. It's like you hear about these guys that can put their hand on an engine and just by the vibration of the hood, they can tell what's wrong. This is the kind of people I was dealing with in the aviation world. So it's like, wow. They just really have a knack for it.
they speak vibrations.
Yeah, they just had an interesting way of interacting with machinery.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, you think of an aircraft. I mean, there's so many subsystems and redundancies. That's how they're designed. They're designed with redundancy in mind. So as you get up to these larger commercial aircraft, there's like secondary and tertiary electrical generation systems. There's ramjet. I mean, there's all sorts of crazy systems that we had specialized technicians for. Like one was focused on the avionics. One was focused on motors. One was focused on landing gear. It's kind of
Yeah.
cool.
I always enjoy what sort of backup systems. So like the A10, it's got the redundant hydraulics, and then the tertiary is drive-by-wire.
Oh, we got to talk about the A10 for a second, dude. The
Oh
A10
yeah,
is
dude.
because they keep talking about retiring it, but are they?
Can I buy one if they retire it? I'd love one.
Yeah, I would. That would be awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah, so let's pull up a photo of it. I'd love to talk through the A10 with you. I think it's a fascinating aircraft, and the redundancies are real. I mean, I remember seeing A10s that have been shot up in Iraq.
yeah,
Let me see if I can pull up that one. That's a really cool photo of an A10 that just been like totally peppered with bullets.
yeah.
Oh yeah, here it is right here.
I think it was the whole port side wing was just tore to shreds.
No, you're right. Here I'll
I
pull. I'll
remember
throw
the
it on the
same photo
screen.
you're referring to.
No, I think it is. Let me know. Here, I'll pull it up here. Is it? Let's see if I can zoom in a little
That
bit.
looks about right. There's one that's even worse though.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember where I saw that video clip. I mean, it was on YouTube when you're just like, I need some A10 carnage.
I know it. Yeah, it's such a cool airframe, and like what a lot of people don't know is that it's a single pilot aircraft. This is the Air Force's website here. Um, it's a single pilot aircraft, and I don't know if they might have some trainers that are twin pilots, but basically the pilot is sitting in this titanium bathtub here.
Hmm.
I don't know if you can see that, but like, so there's the pilot's shielded by this canopy, and then underneath, which is where you would likely be taking, small arms fire from the ground, the pilot's shielded by this giant titanium bathtub. So he's basically sitting in like this. Well, it's a bathtub intended to protect the pilot. But yeah, like you said, all the redundancies. I mean, the engines are intentionally tucked back here. You have these horizontal, stabilators here and like the aircraft can function with just one engine, with just one of these
Hmm.
wing sections. It's really incredible what it can do. And I
Yeah.
think it was, yeah, it's talk about the redundancies. I mean, from an engineering perspective, when they were designing this aircraft in the 60s and 70s, what do you think was going through the engineers and program managers' heads when they were designing this aircraft?
How do we kill as many tanks as possible?
I know that's what I always tell.
Yeah.
That was meant to destroy tanks in the Foley Gap. That's what it was made for.
No, the thing that I wonder is what was the engineers, well, like what was going through their heads when they went in the hangar and it was an empty hangar, and there's this what they think is this Cadillac with the white sheet over it, and then they pull the curtain back and then they see this gun and they're like, oh, well, we have to build a airframe around that. Oh, okay, I see our challenge now.
I forgot about that. Yeah, really, the aircraft was designed around the gun, so
Yeah,
much so that they had to put a tail stand on the aircraft when they took the gun out to service it. If they had to, do
yeah,
service on the guns or lubricate it, they had to put a tail stand on the aircraft so the aircraft wouldn't fall on its tail because the weight and balance was built,
yeah.
with the gun attached. Um, which is cool to think. I don't have a lot of knowledge on aviation armament systems, but I find it fascinating. Like because there's so much more that has to go into it. There's so much more that has to go into it from a reliability perspective. How do you simulate, a gun that can fire reliably while you're going 400 knots, and on a 30-degree bank? I mean, that's got to be a difficult problem to reliability test that system.
And I think they found out that they needed to have an engine restart put in uh, because of
Oh,
the shock wave created from the cyclic rate of that weapon system. It effectively put out the turbofans, and they had to do a restart afterwards.
I didn't know that. It makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I could see it disrupting the airflow into the inlets.
Yeah, dude, it's a serious cannon. It's
Oh
badass.
man. Yeah, what is it? It shoots what is it, 30 millimeter cannon or it
Yeah,
was a Gao 8? I can't remember what it
Mm,
is.
I should know this.
Now I got to pull up the gun. We can talk
Bad
about guns now. A10 gun. I think it's the GAU 8. Yeah. The GAU 8 Avenger.
Yes.
Gosh, this is a really cool gun. I'm gonna throw this one up on the screen too. Rotary guns are so cool, but they present their own problems when you're doing reliability testing as well.
Yeah.
The Avenger.
How does the when you're going full stick, like how does the vibrational mode that the weapon system's in, firing or not, that induces vibrations into the frame, and you're still trying to
Exactly.
fly the thing. You're still having the pilot do maneuvers. I mean, it's not like you just can see down to the ground, so you're always banking, so you can see what you're going to shoot at, or at least the pilot is. The only experience I have flying an A10 is my RC plane that I built.
Oh, cool.
I put an
Yeah, I'm
FPV.
glad you have an interest in it. I'm glad you have an interest in A10. It's like, it's a cool system. So you're thinking of, how do you make the airframe more reliable with that gun attached to it? And here I am thinking of like, how do you make the gun reliable while it's flying around on an airplane? These are all really complex problems. And it's interesting that the A10 is still in service. It's like, are you familiar with Lindy's Law? It's basically it's technology that's been around for a long time is likely to stay around for a long time. So think, shooting a lead projectile out of a steel tube, which we've been doing since the 1400s, and we're still doing it today. We're still shooting firearms. The A10 has been in service for the better part of 40, 50 years. And I think they've tried to get rid of it, but it's been such a proven system. So they keep,
Not only that, I can only imagine what it's like being the bad guy and you just hear burp.
Can't imagine, dude.
Yeah. I mean, just the psychological factor being on the receiving end of that gun, and then having the aircraft do a pass, and you're like, what's going to drop from it?
I know. You can put so much armament on that airframe. That's really what it's designed to do. I think that the one thing that people have called out is it's slow. It's a slow, low flying, straight wing airplane. It was meant to be, but so it's susceptible to, being attacked from the ground with modern, shoulder fired missiles even or SAM sites. It's very susceptible to that. So
yeah, but all the modern aircraft should be equipped with countermeasure deployment system, CMDS.
Yep, that's a good point. And I think the exhaust, I think the turbofans that you were talking about on that, those are GE turbofans. I think they're intentionally shrouded behind those vertical stabilators too, to kind of with the intention of masking the thermal signature a little bit too. So I think you're right. I think it does have countermeasures too. It has to. I would think it has to.
At least some basic flares, chafes.
Yeah. It's crazy what's happening in the world, man. It's the one other aircraft too that I love that's been so prolific. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts about this. Is the F-16? I mean, if we just, I talked to my buddy in the Air Force who's a Air Force pilot. He's like, dude, the F-16 is still a relevant aircraft after so many years. I was like, man, I mean, the F-16 is still in service in so many NATO countries.
You had to go there, man.
I had to go there. Yeah. Have you ever seen an F-16 up close? I have not. I've seen them kind of from far away, but maybe. But
I mean, my dad took me to see the Blue Angels a few times, but never, or at least I don't remember going up close and be like, "Ooh, hey, this is a cool plane." Because Blue Angels use F-16s, don't they? Do they?
I don't know. I honestly don't know. Let me see. It's either F-16s or F-18s, maybe. F-18s.
It's F-18s. See, I was wrong.
Still, F-18 is a cool airplane too. Yeah, I think that's the challenge that the DoD is running into now is that we have these really like large, big programs that are awesome. We have the F-35, the F-16. I would say the F-18 falls into that category. These really large, like really complex, hard to maintain, hard to develop, manned aircraft that are in the DoD inventory. And from some of the military officers that are still on active duty that I've talked to, they're saying that we might need to think about having smaller drones in the battlefield too. I think that's really, especially the maneuver guys I've talked to, they're like they want tactical drones that could be employed at the platoon or maybe even the squad level. So I was like, that's pretty cool. I don't know what that looks like though, because there's a lot of small UAS programs that it would be interesting to see what sort of architecture they end up going with. There's a lot of small drone companies out there now, lots. So
So there
there
are.
won't be, in 20 years, there won't be that many of them probably around.
I don't know about that. I think, and granted, I'm not doing RC planes as much as, not like I was like a pro at it or anything, but living in Pasadena down the street from my cousin, he was big into building his own quadcopters, and being on the
Oh,
UAV
cool.
team at Cal State LA as well. It was like, okay, we're always talking about RC parts, components. I was up on what's the new 70 millimeter, ducted fan, which sounds really cool, but it's a ducted fan. You wish you had, you wish you had a jet engine, but you got a ducted fan. So, but I think there was, and still is, enough people out there that want to build their own parts, sort of like the Legos, where I think there's still a space for a lot of up and comers to be innovative and a lot of people to have modular setups.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think eventually for some of these small drones, you're kind of already seeing it in the FPV world. They're kind of all going with a common architecture. There's basically a carbon fiber frame that you bolt the
Yeah.
motors and the flight controller onto. I want to build one. That's the only reason I know about this.
Yeah.
Is you can build a small drone that's very capable now for less than $400.
Yeah.
You can build one. Like a really capable FPV drone. Have you looked at these? Have you looked at like? I think you have one. I don't know if you've
Oh,
ended
yeah.
up buying one. Yeah.
Yeah. I got an Autel. So I went from, here's like the maker level that, you're just doing some hobby RC stuff, to, hey, let's just get one with thermal.
Dude, the Autels are nice. Are those Japanese or Australian?
Chinese.
Chinese? The Autels are. I'm thinking of a different company. 'Cause I know Japan is eager to get some small UAS programs off the ground to compete with the likes of DJI and I guess Autel. I can't remember the Japanese company that's looking at building small drones now, but I want to say there's some investment from Sony potentially. So can't remember the name though. I don't know.
To me, Sony investing in some drones is kind of logical. Sony's got a lot of just multimedia. They do everything, right? Like they make movies, they make, video games and consoles. So, if you can not have an aircraft, like a helicopter flying, shooting that Gran Turismo movie, for example, you could have a quadcopter with a high def camera doing the same thing at a fraction of the cost. It's not
Totally.
so bad. Whether that's their, roadmap is a whole different story. And I'm kind of, inferring what their leadership may or may not have been thinking, whether they even care about that. I think they definitely have money to burn on jet fuel, so they can have some Bell helicopter just rolling around. So, uh,
Yeah.
but I think what's really interesting about the Autel versus what you can buy here, U.S. made, versus like you get the super China stuff, your DJIs, is when you want to start using this, what's ready to go out of the box in TAC, specifically ATAK. So it's not like you can grab any drone out the box and then use the UAS tool for ATAK. So that's kind of the limiting factor, and that's really what drove the Autel purchase, because DJI was out of the question. So it's like
Sure.
the lesser of two evils.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And for those that are not familiar with ATAK, the ATAK platform that Vasili mentioned, it's essentially a way for the DoD to, and also law enforcement, to issue essentially a Samsung smartphone that is embedded with a bunch of tools that give you situational awareness, not just of where you are, but where your teammates are. There's other intel that can be tied into that as well, including ISR assets. I'm not really as familiar with the UAS plugin with ATAK, but maybe you could go into that. What would a drone do for a local law enforcement officer who's responding to an emergency, let's say a potentially violent emergency? How would they use that drone and integrate it into ATAK? I don't really know how that
So
works.
not being trained in how law enforcement now uses UAS applications, I can't exactly speak to how they're using it.
Sure.
But I can tell you that, like, if I was a guy that was loaning my time out to the
Hmm.
local law enforcement, I essentially could fly up, give them the location of using the thermal. You can spot that warm body trying to hide in whether it's in between vehicles that they can't see, or behind some foliage. They're trying to use cover and concealment, trying to maneuver around houses. You can essentially be that quick to deploy aerial asset. And when you have that in ATAK, now you get some interesting things, like you can feed the footage coming from the camera of that unmanned system to anyone else that's running ATAK and subscribes to that video feed. So now people who are on patrol, they might be able to see themselves and that bad guy around the corner. But now that's all very hypothetical, because if I was a cop, I probably wouldn't be on my phone looking around. It'd be, someone would be guiding me probably.
Yeah.
But
No, good point. Yeah, I can
again,
tell
I'm a
you.
nerd, not a cop. So
No. I totally get it. I think one of the things, I was a platoon leader in Afghanistan when they started issuing out these Android phones. This is kind of preceded
Net
ATAK.
Warrior.
I think it was. I
Yeah,
can't remember.
either that or Land Warrior, but I think it was probably Net Warrior.
Yeah, it might have been. I can't remember what the name of the program was, but I know, the functionality was kind of limited. I could basically see where I was with the map software that was on there. Honestly, what we used it the most was because it had Zulu time. We just would use it to time our radios too. But then I'm trying to think. It had pretty limited functionality, but I could see the direction they were trying to go. And to your point, like when I was trying to figure out, what was going on with the ISR footage, what we had to do is we had to relay the information over the radio. So one guy would be monitoring the ISR feed on a big screen back in our talk, back in our company outpost, our home base. And he had to relay what was going on, in his own words. He had to describe to me what was going on, what the enemy was doing, what kind of weapons they were employing. And if I was able to pull up that feed, or even better yet, control that ISR feed from that smartphone, which I guess is, the direction they're going, that would have been a game changer, because then I would have known the terrain, and I wouldn't have to rely on somebody else to, tell me over the radio what's going on. It was like playing telephone. So
Yeah, and that's one of the things you can do for ATAK using the UAS tool. You can hand off control, and it's limited functionality. And I haven't used every single drone. Like, I've only ever really used the DJI or an Autel, and it's cool because you can essentially say, okay, we'll hand off to this person, request access.
Oh, that's cool.
And,
Okay.
and then you can do things like see the picture in picture, depending on which version of that plugin you have and which version of ATAK you're running. You can even do augmented reality markers. So in the camera feed, as you're changing elevation and aspect ratio of the camera in the field of regard, you'll actually have markers that you can see, whether it's your guys or points of interest, what have you, things that have been marked, or a potential enemy location. So like maybe for search and rescue team, hey, here's a new search zone that you're looking at on the topo from top down, and then you can see that in augmented reality, making sure you actually put the drone in a better spot to view where search and rescue personnel haven't been yet.
That's awesome. That I could think of a million different use cases for that I would have used. If you could mark a spot in a pretty accurate geographic spot, that would have been really, really functional. One thing I wanted to ask you about, on the topic of all these drones and how they communicate with both soldier worn equipment, and then other larger echelon communication devices at higher levels. Do you feel like the DoD has a difficult time having all these things talk to each other? That was always a challenge for me. Is it's great data, great technology that's getting fielded to our soldiers, but how does it all communicate together in an efficient way? That was one thing that I was always challenged with as a company level officer, at least.
So subjective question gets a subjective answer.
Sure.
And I'm sure there's going to be some people from the acquisitions community that may not be happy with our discussion right now. But I think we can start from inception to implementation. And I think it all sounds like it's a real good idea. And I think somewhere in between the good idea fairy starts waving the magic wand, and then you get, whether it's scope creep or, sort of like the Bradley fighting vehicles. Now it's like, let's put a full tank, turret on there, or, whatever example we can use in the past. It's like, yeah, well, we can use this very simple geospatial situational awareness tool to allow leadership at the platoon level to do X, whether it's land nav or mark targets, or like JTAC operators to do, something like mark where the bomb should go. But then somewhere in between, especially the bigger up you go, or the more conventional in forces you go, I think there seems to always be a disconnect. And part of this is due to, that the legacy systems that are still there, they still want to deal with legacy waveforms, or it still has to fit in a pouch. So now your radio has to have a smaller battery or smaller heat sink, so it overheats. I mean, there's all these different things that now come into play that will affect you downrange. And some of that isn't even like the why is it the stuff can't communicate part of the problem. It may have been figured out, may have the solution may have been kind of whiteboarded out for implementation, but then at the end of the day, something happened, and the delivered product that went downrange at the warfighter wasn't the same as the one that was going to solve all the problems. And I'm not saying it's one person's fault or another. I just think it's a culture that everyone, whether it's industry or US DoD, is kind of either falling victim to perpetually or has fallen victim to, and then kind of gotten out of that death spiral, so to speak, and then implemented something novel or effective.
Yeah, no, I totally think you're right. I think there's what you said is spot on, and there's a differentiation too between, you know, products in the defense space that go on a soldier or are life critical. So think, body armor, think, an ejection seat in a said F-16, like all the life critical life support systems are all very difficult to replace. I had a really long conversation with my buddy about this, which kind of it helped steer his career, because initially he wanted to work on aircraft, on some of these large, programs of record that we all know so well, the F-16, the F-35, the A-10 even. And he said, he would be a landing gear structural engineer for the first 10 years of his career, because in order to work on the cooler stuff that actually goes on the pilot or the pilot interacts with, it's just a very slow development process for the Air Force or the Army to qualify anything new that could potentially put a person at risk. So what he did is he decided to work on unmanned systems, because the development can be much quicker, because there's not a risk of a person, being injured or having a fatality in that unmanned system, whether it be an unmanned ground vehicle or an unmanned aerial vehicle. So I thought that was kind of cool. He chose his career on that, and he was right. He got to work on some incredible stuff, more so than he would have if he had gone, to the aviation world and been a design engineer in the aviation world.
So does he know when Skynet's going to go online, or?
I got to ask him. He's a lot of his career has been focused on, how you capture data, like large, terabytes and terabytes of data, either from an unmanned system on the ground or in the air, and then how do you, 98% of that data is going to be useless, but that 2% of data that you capture that is unique and is going to, inform a new machine learning model, to maybe inform some collision avoidance software, or help the drone pilot be more effective in either a tactical environment or a commercial application. That's been his main focus, and I think that's really cool. It's like, and we've seen this with Tesla. When Tesla went all in on just optical sensors and they started removing LiDAR systems from their cars, it's amazing what you can do with a high quality camera and some really badass software behind it.
Yeah. And was that when they were having the Tesla now, when they had the collisions because of sun reflecting off of like an 18-wheeler and the camera couldn't tell? They didn't
So
have enough
that's a
camera.
good example. So that's a
Yeah.
good example. That's the model you want to train for. So you want to be able to, so let's think worst conditions. So, sun directly at the optical sensor, which, cameras hate that. They hate having, bright light directly in the lens. It overloads them. So worst case scenario. So let's say you have, direct sun or it's being reflected off, the back bumper of an 18 wheeler.
Yeah.
How do you sort through that, and how do you get the algorithm, the AI/ML algorithm, to understand that, hey, this is just a glitch in the driving experience. Like, don't use this data, ignore this data, or maybe only use the portion of the optical sensor that's not occluded by the sun. Use that data. So yeah, that's the 2% of situations I'm talking about. Is exactly what you mentioned. At 98% of the time, if you're an unmanned aerial vehicle or unmanned ground vehicle, so you use a Waymo taxi for example. Like, you're just me driving in a straight line. Not too many variables, but that 2% of variables is what you have to train these models on. So the outliers.
That's that's a pretty interesting conversation now that we're about to have, because I had some fun working at Cal State LA in the multidisciplinary flight controls and dynamics lab, and
Cool.
we were essentially really cheap labor for, back then it was NASA Dryden, for essentially they had their fiber optic strain sensors. They put it
Okay.
on our airframe. It was a twin boom pusher, which I wasn't very happy with the inefficient design, because you had the static margin being backwards, because your propeller, your engine, all of your thrust was in the back behind the quarter cord, and so
Yep.
your payload had to be up front as far as possible, and we had enough ballast in there, and it's just, you had the sweet glider, but then you put this configuration of that glider that could have been better, but we had a plan for inducing different flight modes and how do we record the data and all that, and it was pretty interesting, because we have some conversations, and then I just got done doing my second summer internship, doing flight testing, and I was part of the ground crew that last one, and it was like, okay, well, which one are we doing? Here's our elaborate flight test schedule, and what frequencies are we allowed to be on, and so on and so forth. Then I came to the lab, and I was like, oh, I'm a mechanical engineer, but I got some experience in this stuff. And they're like, well, at least there's this, the electrical engineer, the controls guys versus the MEs. And they're like, we're better than you. And, typical college stuff, which is all silly. And so that was,
Yeah, I'm with you.
fun, man. Yeah. Like, we should be on a team. Let's all take our expertise and just listen to each other.
I love it. It's amazing what you can do. So I don't know if you've heard of the company called, I think it's called Rock Robotic. Have you heard of this company that
No.
makes payloads for, call them, mid-size commercial UAVs, so bigger than your Autel? It's I'm gonna pull this up. It's amazing what you can buy off the shelf now. You can now, if you want to start some sort of surveying company, and what used to take a helicopter crew a couple of days and a lot of manual measuring, you can now do with a drone in 20 minutes with the right software. So let me share this with you. One of my friends showed me this. This is so cool. The company's called Rock Robotic, and they make integrated payloads for drones, and they can do lidar mapping. So it's a lidar sensor, usually matched with like a really high end camera that's got some sort of DSLR architecture, and you can do some incredible stuff. I mean, for 30 grand, you can buy like a pro level setup to where you can do accurate mapping, and basically you run the images through their software, and they measure everything for you. So this can be a huge opportunity. I mean, one of the use cases I've seen this used for is basically surveying like an offshore oil rig. So same thing. What used to take a Bell helicopter, burning jet fuel and costing probably $4,000 an hour to stay in the air, what used to take a crew of a bunch of different people on that Bell helicopter probably a week or two, you can now fly a drone, do a circle with that drone around the oil rig maybe a couple times, capture all the data, and then run that data through software that can detect, hey, the north side of the oil rig is it's 2 inches too low. There's some sort of structural damage that's apparent, or there's some sort of, they can do stress analysis just by doing a loop around it, and they can identify any issues with the oil rig. I'm like, I mean, you just took what would have been probably a $50,000 or $60,000 project, and now it's a $2,000 project.
Yeah.
Pretty much. I mean, as far as cost goes.
I mean, especially if you're comparing that over time. You say, hey, I added a crane on this side. Well, if I'm flying around, here's my model 2 weeks ago, here's my model today,
Yep.
and that crane is causing something to bend or
Spot.
one of
Nope.
the crane. Yeah.
That's precisely it. Yeah. That's actually a good example. Is if you have a piece of heavy equipment, and then you do a survey. Let's say, hey, I want to do a survey. You can probably do surveys more often now since they're less costly. So yeah.
Yeah.
So let's say Vasili owns an oil rig, 50 miles outside Houston. let me know. I want an oil rig out there too.
Right.
And then you install a crane on the north side of the oil rig for whatever reason, and you say, hey, 3 weeks after the oil rig's installed, I want the UAV company to come out here and do a survey for us, and do some structural analysis from afar. Yeah, that's all possible now. So there's a lot of applications for drones, although the regulations are still being written. The FAA is kind of writing the regulations as they go to identify all the ways that you can and cannot use a drone. So, but I thought that was cool. Really, really innovative company.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. Last time I actually talked about getting LiDAR scans in was when we were on STLTS. And it was like, well, how do we have the updated terrain model to see if a soldier dug a foxhole, and then we could do shot adjudication better. And then there was a partner on our team that was what they did. They had a drone that would go in, LiDAR map a new structure or a cave to see if something shifted or something due to tectonic plates causing unhealthy structural damage in the support system for some tunnels or caves during mining applications. It was crazy. I was watching their video and it's like, man, you can do some pretty interesting things. I don't know how much you actually need this to play laser tag, but you know, really, and that's kind of the way I was kind of viewing it. It's like, are we trying to play laser tag, or are we trying to get the new shit hot technology out there just to show how badass US DoD is? I think our warfighters are best asset. Let's give them the skills so they can train with what they're actually going to go down range with.
Yeah, it's critical. Yeah, it's so important to have the equipment that a soldier interacts with be, both simple and easy to train on. Because when you're, sleep deprived and you're in some sort of combat environment in, pick a third world country, it's your cognitive abilities decline. And I've talked a lot about this with people in the DoD, people in the defense industry. The equipment has to be really, really easy to use. Um, even in the worst conditions, like picture the absolute worst conditions. You got 24 hours, no sleep. You're tired. You're hungry. The equipment still has to be user friendly.
Yeah,
So
the familiarity is a real thing, which is actually the gun that Jackie got at Heart Mountain finally showed up today,
nice, good, good.
and so we were kind of talking about like, hey, what's different between the M4 TDP? Texting Chris on the phone, and I'm like, hey, what up, dude? We got it, we're good, and
Cool.
uh, I forget how exactly we got down the rabbit hole, but it was along the lines of ambidextrous controls and why I don't like having the bad lever, inside of my trigger guard, or having a weird non-standard as far as the way the good Lord and Eugene Stoner didn't intend it.
Same.
Stuff on my
Yeah.
AR.
I'm the same way. It's the AR platform, the M4A1 specifically, is such a natural extension of my arm that, yeah, I'm the same way. I don't really want anything that's like that that they don't put on an M4. It's like it's unfamiliar to me, and I would have to. There's no way, since I'm not in the army anymore, there's no way that I would be able to put in the hours and retrain like I did, when I was still active duty as an infantry guy. That's those habits are ingrained, right? And that's why the DoD keeps going back to M4 ergonomics, is because we've trained millions of soldiers on that exact muscle memory, that manual of arms. So it'd be very hard to go to something new at this moment. But I don't know, could be
That's
done.
why. That's exactly why that's why our submission looks the way it does for NGSW, or looked. Now it's past tense. You can see it in the Cody Firearms Museum. So we've been there, we've done that. That's over. I'm not trying to rehash it, but we got a good user acceptance rating because we use standard M4 controls, things that like the Marine Corps had adopted back then. It was Norgon, and then CMMG bought the IP to it, and now you've got your the ambidextrous mag catch, where it's now with the CMMG label on it, but it's solid, it's simple, and it's there. It's not like, up higher or not where the thumb actually goes naturally.
I know.
The
I'm with you on
ergonomics.
the bad lever. I'm with you on the bad lever too. Is like,
Yeah.
I don't really want anything in the trigger wheel. I got, except for the trigger.
What?
I don't want anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm with you on the bad lever. I've used them. They're cool. Really cool product by Magpul, but yeah, I've never actually installed one because same reason you cited. So,
But what I guess now that you're not in the military firearms world, so eyeball deep, I guess is a good way to put it. I don't know. Now are you finding yourself doing more research on like how I can upgrade my own gun, or hey, here's the attachment that I wanted always, but I never actually got because I was at FN, for example.
I haven't yet. I mean, lately I bought a couple optics. I almost think, and I've told my buddies this, whenever they're going to buy a new rifle, I'm like, make sure, I don't know what rifle you're looking at, but make sure you spend as much money on the optic as you do on the rifle. And that's worked out well for me because at a certain price point, a rifle is going to perform or it's not, at a certain quality level. I don't want to say that they're commodities, but the best OEMs in this marketplace, they produce a really good product.
Mm-hmm.
Where you can differentiate your ability to acquire the target is really the glass, is really the optic that goes on the rifle is I would say equally important to the rifle itself. Because if you have an optic that's, poor quality or has bad eye relief, it's going to really inhibit your abilities.
Yeah. Practice. I mean, even with, your run of the mill MBUS sights, the ones that just flip up, they don't lock in place. Like even just painting the front orange so it's easier to acquire. I mean, it's pretty interesting how you give it to like someone who went through Marine Corps Recruit Depot, San Diego, like my cousin, for example. And I was like, man, these are shitty sights. You can never hit 400. And he's just like, oh yeah. And there it is. He kept ringing that 400-yard steel. I'm like, okay, all right. I underestimated those, but still, what's the group size? What was the steel size? But it's just you take enough training, you understand the basics, and you don't rush. That's my problem. I put the pedal to the floor all the time. you see me on the range.
No, you like to move fast. I think in general, I think it's why you've been successful is you'll see a capability gap or you'll see a new technology come out, and I feel like your brain is always looking for ways to harness that technology and incorporate it into what you guys are doing, which I think is cool. I'm really excited to see, what your portfolio does in the future. Like you guys are growing pretty fast as far as the types of products that you're developing, which is cool. And you're actually building them in the US, which is another thing that's underestimated. People don't realize how difficult it is to build stuff. It's, design stuff, put it in SolidWorks or Altium. That's one thing, but to actually manufacture it is very, very difficult, as you know.
Yeah. And then, like with our grip modular electronics that, we were planning the release for SHOT Show, but we sat down and we're like, okay, this is going to cost way too much money to manufacture. What do we do wrong? Let's pump the brakes. We got to do a redesign. Sure. Okay, too many blind and bury vias, too much this, too much that. Okay, now our U.S. manufacturer that we've been using will have trouble doing the blind and bury vias with this many layers, and we got to now find a new guy. So now you got to vet everyone, and that's the biggest challenge. Who's a U.S. manufacturer that doesn't just farm their work out to say Taiwan? And there's a
It's
lot
very
of dudes that
challenging.
do. Yeah.
Very challenging. Yeah, it's no. I think that's a capability. Whenever I talk to someone that has like a high performing machine shop, especially if it's coupled with some design engineers, there's not a shop out there that I know that's not like super busy, that actually does the work in the U.S. like you said and can do ITAR related work. That's becoming pretty rare. It's a big opportunity for people that want to get into that space because there's a lot of things that the DoD wants to try out, but yeah, like you said, there's just not as many manufacturers in
And
the
even
U.S.
software. You'd be surprised how many people don't write their own software.
I believe it.
Like
Yeah, let's talk software. Yeah, let's talk
I was
software
in
for a
the,
little bit. Yeah.
you're gonna love this one. I was in line at AUSA this past year, the annual meeting, and they messed up the badging system. And that was our first year not exhibiting because I spent more time away from my booth than in the booth. Like, just save the money, right? So I'm
Yeah.
in line, and it was I forget his name, but it was the CEO from Armament Research Company,
Okay.
and that's where they've got their version of electronics that it. I'm not trying to get into the pissing match on this one unless you really want it, but it's like they do some things that might be similar to some things that we do. We both have very different approaches. Their Beltway Bandit style, a little more VC. Their website's a little sexier, and ours is straight up like, here's what we do, and we'll bring hardware downrange, and we'll play that game that way instead of just me trash talking. But while we were in line, I had my lapel pin with my logo on it, and we were like, hey, so what do you do? And he's like, oh, I do this stuff, weapon system monitoring. Oh, that's cool. And before I could even tell him what we do, he starts talking about my butt stock, and I'm like, okay, keep talking. And I was like, oh, so you guys on TAC yet? No, we don't have our own TAC plugin. I was like, oh, that's cool, man. We have a TAC plugin, and we write that stuff. Like, do you want one? And he's like, oh, yeah, we don't do it in house, but that'd be something to consider. I'm like, wait, so these guys don't do it in house?
It's very
And
common.
that's when it really started clicking. I was like, man, so they're the ones that during NGSW was like, oh, we got to use ARC, or we got to use Secubit, or something, or I guess it was not Secubit, but Weapon Logic was their American arm of the Israelis. So, but yeah, it's like who actually writes their own software in the United States, if they even write it at all?
That's a big challenge. I know, I would venture to say most of the software that people use on a day-to-day basis, like most of the commercial software is probably, yeah, it's probably offshored, or at least a portion of it is offshored, maybe with some oversight from the US. But yeah, yeah, software development is interesting. It's something I want to do a lot more research on because there's a lot of native language tools now where you might not need to be a hardcore computer scientist to write software in the near future. I think there's some solutions that are coming down the pipeline. Maybe not for some of the stuff that you're doing. I think the stuff you're doing is probably a little more complex, but I don't know. Yeah, I've found that too, that software is often outsourced to, either a software firm that specializes in a unique niche or it's offshored to another country.
Yeah, and to the natural language sort of Chat GPT style, where it's really that's where it's kind of going. Like, okay, how much front end stuff can be done with that? Okay, I bet you can get quite a bit of front end stuff done. How much back end stuff can be done with it? I mean, maybe you can start doing some pieces, but the one thing that those AI systems don't have, or maybe they do, and it's in some Google lab somewhere, and we're about to all be obsoleted
Yeah, right.
tomorrow. Um, they don't deal with the architecture. They don't deal with the what does the customer want. Like, for example, we're building API tools. Uh, Shout out to Jeremy and Brandon right now, if they ever get this far in the video. But so they're building the tools right now to automate tax server management, and they've got it so that you can whip out tax stack, off the phone, log in and be like, I want to create another user. So imagine now for an IT guy in some law enforcement agency. Well, he's got a few hundred guys or a few thousand guys that, they're from police officers to meter maids, and you've got to keep track of all your assets. One thing that law enforcement doesn't have is that Blue Force tracker equivalent for the person. And, you got Axon body cams, you've got radios, you got all that stuff. But, being accountable for your police officer, whether they go around a corner and they need help, but the radio call doesn't work, or they turned the corner to an alley, they went left, they zagged right, they got the guy, and now they're like, well, I'm in an alley. Which alley, right? That situational awareness tool is important, and TAC is becoming more and more relevant for them in law enforcement, being first responder. And so now the challenge really is the adoption. So how does an IT guy for a department that's like one guy, maybe they have a few $1 million for a budget, maybe they got way more than that, start learning enough? He's got to become a subject matter expert to now choose which technology. There's a build or buy decision that has to happen. And then you've got to manage that technology if you decide to build it yourself. And even after you build it or buy it, you adding users, creating groups is still cumbersome. And it's by no fault of them and their technical capabilities or ability to learn it. I mean, it's just the way TAC is. I mean, TAC Product Center has done a wonderful job building this and maintaining it. But it's all been from a DoD perspective, where you go down range and you don't have to worry about groups. You had your comms, your radio fill, your security standards, and you're downrange in your third world country talking with friendlies on the same radio frequency. And you had your encryption level there. It wasn't like, well, my platoon versus someone else's platoon versus, the support guys that are making sure we've got the helos ready for QRF or something like that. Right. It's not like you needed to section all those out. You knew where the fob was, right? Because you're like, yeah, it's nice to know where home is if I need RTB. But in this case, you don't need to have one precinct seeing the other precinct on patrol. And for the IT guy to build that out and build that echelon where, your fire department doesn't need to see your patrol cops all the time. EMS doesn't need to see where the dog catcher is. And then these are examples of, they might sound a little extreme, except if for a county level to implement this as asset tracking and as an overall comms tool during an emergency is actually pretty cool. And that IT guy, we're building tools to make his life easier as we speak, where now it's an intuitive set of interface or user interface tools to essentially create and manage users, manage how those users communicate with other groups of users, and then in an emergency, the ability to press the magic button to make everyone communicate in a predetermined manner. And so,
I love that.
Yeah,
that's great. I mean, that's emergency response. What Vasili is describing is spot on. It's, when I was overseas in Afghanistan or just in a training exercise, all 4,000 of us, the brigade, supporting elements, we're all using the same radio architecture. I could talk to a helicopter that was from a totally different unit, never met the guy, but he was using the same type of radio, same frequency, same encryption, like you're saying. So how do you get, if there's like some sort of large scale emergency, let's use Hurricane Katrina, for example. And then you have the New Orleans PD, you have, probably every local county, you probably have some federal assets that respond to a natural disaster like that. How does everyone from the New Orleans PD to, let's say, the county PD to the Louisiana State, police department, how do they all talk to each other? I don't know the answer to that. That seems like a pretty unique problem to solve.
It is, and it's not out of reach. So we did last year. We supported the largest mass casualty training event scenario in Lawrence, South Carolina, at the Sawmill. And so what Lawrence PD did, Lawrence EMS, Josh did a stellar job setting this whole thing up for the first time ever. But what they did is they said, okay, well, this we're going to simulate a hurricane, and it's going to come through an open air concert. and now we're going to have response times from people throughout the whole region. And how is it we can coordinate them? How is it we can prove that, a new method of coordination, whether it's first time on scene, and now you've got to, get a call sign, or, your quarterback and their quarterback kind of have to talk to each other. So, you've got different echelons of communication, different capabilities as far as someone who's really active as a search and rescue operations or operator, or your fire guy who he's really good with the jaws of life, and he's got to get the car flipped over or the person cut out or what have you. And to bring this full circle back to TAC, we essentially showed that Spartanburg coroner's office, we set them up beforehand with TAC servers, so they had WinTAC running, or everyone was on the same TAC server for this event. But pretty much they had WinTAC running in their mobile operations center. And I think Clinton, South Carolina, their police department had a UAS operator already running a UAS tool with a really badass Autel drone. And also they had ATAK going. And the incident commander still had a clipboard and a radio and a yellow vest. And we'd roll around like, hey, sir, how you doing? You need help? No, I'm good. Just looking for my guys. Hey, where's my guys? I need fire 1. Where's PD3? Check in. I'm like, we can just kind of show you here using this. And by the second day, people were realizing like, okay, there's a better tool for this. And it's not the end all be all. It's never going to replace if, your magical EMP or hypothetical EMP happens and all our comms and all our electronics die. It definitely has limitations, but this is stuff that can help expedite that search and rescue operation.
Totally. If people want to find out more about your company, that training exercise that you did in South Carolina, what's the best place to find information about that? I'm gonna link it below. So people can click on it. But could you explain where the best place to find information about your company is?
Yeah, our website, bkinsys.com, or our YouTube page. We've got a few videos, especially from that event.
Okay.
Yeah, and then there's like, TAC videos, like what is TAC, or, some other informational tools on there as well.
Yeah, I'll link it. Vasili, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, man. This is awesome.
Yeah, been a blast.
Feel free to stay on. I'm going to hit the end recording. I want to ask you something, but I'll cut this part out. But yeah.
Rock and roll.